The stolen treasures of ancient Egypt, once buried deep within the tombs of pharaohs, have a power that transcends time and place. These sacred relics, looted and scattered across the globe, are believed to carry the divine essence of Egypt's gods. For centuries, the mysterious curse of the pharaohs has loomed over those who dare to disturb the resting places of the dead. But what if this curse isn't just myth? What if these artifacts still harbor forces beyond human comprehension, capable of shaping the fate of the living? The truth about Egypt's stolen treasures is far from over, and the echoes of their ancient power may still reverberate today. The shadow of Egypt looms larger in the modern world than most people realize. Beneath the glittering surface of its monuments, pyramids, and mummies lies a legacy shrouded in mystery and steeped in curses that echo through history. For centuries, tales of an ancient curse tied to the tombs of Egypt's pharaohs have captured the imagination of people worldwide. But what if this curse, the so-called curse of the pharaohs, was not just a myth, a mere superstition designed to scare off tomb robbers? What if, instead, it's a warning, an ominous sign of something darker that stretches through the corridors of time, reaching all the way to today? In fact, the stolen artifacts of Egypt, objects of immeasurable historical and spiritual value, might hold the key to understanding why this curse still haunts us. Is it possible that these ancient relics, many of which vanished without a trace, carry with them a power beyond human comprehension? Let us go back to the beginning, to when Egypt's grandeur was not confined to the ruins scattered across the desert, but to its very heartbeat, its culture, its religion, and its people. The great temples, pyramids, and tombs that we now revere as marvels of ancient engineering were also places of immense spiritual significance. They were built not just to honor the dead, but to protect them, to ensure that the pharaohs and their followers could transcend mortality and join the gods in the afterlife. The tombs, lavishly adorned with treasures, spells, and relics, were seen as portals between the living and the dead. The pharaohs, as divine rulers, entrusted their belongings with great care, knowing that they would need them in the afterlife. But some of those artifacts, it seems, were never meant to leave Egypt. It is within this context that we must understand the profound significance of what happened when these tombs were disturbed, when their treasures were looted, or when they were simply removed from their sacred resting places by foreign hands. It is said that some of these artifacts carry with them a curse, an ancient malediction that could bring ruin to those who possess them. But is it really a curse, or is it something more tangible, more dangerous? Could the treasures taken from these sacred spaces have been imbued with powers, spiritual or otherwise, that were never meant to be unleashed upon the modern world? The journey toward uncovering this mystery begins in the early 20th century with the discovery of the tomb of King Tutankhamun. When Howard Carter and his team unearthed the tomb in 1922, the world was captivated by the treasures found within it. Golden masks, intricate jewelry, priceless statues, and rare artifacts that have been untouched for millennia. Yet, alongside the wonder and awe came something darker, a series of strange deaths and misfortunes among those who were involved in the discovery of the tomb. Among them was Lord Carnarvon, the financier who backed Carter's excavation. Less than a year after the tomb was opened, Carnarvon died from an infected mosquito bite. His death was followed by a string of other untimely demises. Some, like the famous writer Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, were quick to tie these deaths to the curse of the pharaohs, a legend that had long been associated with those who disturbed the tombs of Egypt's rulers. What if these deaths weren't coincidences? What if there was something more insidious at work here, something tied to the artifacts themselves? It's been suggested that the curse wasn't just a superstition, but a protection, a warning placed on the treasures of Egypt to keep them from the wrong hands. These were not just objects. They were vessels of power, and to remove them from their resting places was to invite disaster. The ancient Egyptians understood something that modern civilization has yet to fully grasp: the sacred nature of these relics. They were not mere trinkets to be put on display. They were thought to be imbued with the very essence of the gods, the pharaohs, and the power of the afterlife. The curse, then, might not have been just a divine punishment, but a safeguard to prevent the misuse of these objects. Yet, the idea that Egypt's treasures were taken for something more than just wealth and glory begins to emerge when we consider the broader history of these stolen artifacts. The thefts were not limited to the tombs of the pharaohs, but occurred over a span of centuries, stretching from the early explorations of Egypt by European powers to the modern-day looting of its treasures. The removal of these artifacts was not just the work of amateur archaeologists or treasure hunters. It was orchestrated by powerful forces that recognized the value of these relics, not only for their historical importance, but for their potential to unlock secrets of unimaginable power. The true significance of these stolen treasures becomes clearer when we look at the world of secret societies and hidden agendas. Throughout history, there have been those who believed that possessing the artifacts of Egypt would grant them access to forbidden knowledge, arcane wisdom that could alter the balance of power in the world. Were these treasures simply a way for wealthy and powerful individuals to gain riches, or were they something more? Could these artifacts have been part of a larger, esoteric plan? Perhaps those who took them believed they could use them to control the forces of life and death, or to harness the ancient power of Egypt's gods for their own gain. As we look closer at the modern implications of this story, we begin to realize that the legacy of Egypt's stolen artifacts is far from over. The artifacts that were removed from the tombs, hidden in private collections, or hoarded in museums continue to exert their influence today. In some cases, the owners of these objects have met with tragic ends, just as those in the past did. This cycle of death and misfortune raises the question of whether the curse is real, or if it is merely a reflection of the untold truths hidden within these ancient objects. For decades, many of Egypt's treasures have been lost, their whereabouts unknown. Some have surfaced in private collections, others have been hidden behind the walls of powerful institutions, and many have simply vanished into history. But in recent years, there has been a renewed effort to return these stolen treasures to their rightful home. Egypt has called for the return of its artifacts, but the process has been complicated by politics, greed, and the dark forces that continue to protect these relics. The thefts of the past have left a trail of secrets that have yet to be fully uncovered. The stolen artifacts of Egypt are not just pieces of history. They're symbols of a legacy that refuses to be forgotten. And perhaps, just perhaps, they are waiting for the moment when their true power will finally be revealed. The Curse of the Pharaohs is not a legend to be dismissed lightly. It is a story that weaves together the threads of ancient knowledge, powerful artifacts, and a warning that has crossed the ages. As we trace the stolen relics of Egypt, pieces that have touched the hands of emperors, explorers, and thieves, we realize that these objects are not just relics of the past. They are living remnants of an ancient world that still exerts its influence today. And as we continue to uncover the secrets of Egypt, we must ask ourselves, are we ready to face the consequences of unleashing the power of the pharaohs once again? The legacy of Egypt's stolen artifacts is far from over. The allure of ancient Egypt has captivated the imagination of countless generations, a fascination that stretches back centuries. It was a civilization that spanned millennia, its influence resonating across the ancient world and leaving behind a legacy of mysticism, power, and wealth. But the story of Egypt isn't just one of grandiose monuments, sprawling temples, and monumental tombs. It's also a story of the sacred, of divine authority, and of a belief system that placed the afterlife at the very heart of its culture. The tombs and temples of Egypt were not merely physical spaces. They were portals between the worlds, sanctuaries designed to ensure the smooth transition of the soul into eternity. They were built not just to honor the dead, but to protect them, to house their spirits, and to ensure that their power, knowledge, and treasures could pass into the afterlife. Within these sacred spaces, the pharaohs and their elite were surrounded by magnificent treasures, gold, jewels, statues, and sacred relics that were intended to serve them in the world beyond. However, some of these treasures, meant to accompany the dead on their journey to eternity, would find themselves trapped in time, stolen, and carried away to distant lands where they would become objects of legend and mystery. The tombs of the pharaohs were designed with meticulous care, meant to ensure that their occupants would never be forgotten. The most famous of these tombs are, of course, the ones in the Valley of the Kings, elaborate underground chambers carved into the rocky hillsides. These tombs were not only grand architectural feats, but also symbols of the divine right of kingship, built to house the bodies of rulers who were believed to be gods in human form. The intricate layout of each tomb was purposefully designed to reflect the spiritual journey of the deceased as they passed from life to death, from the mortal world to the afterlife. The walls were decorated with vibrant murals depicting scenes from the pharaoh's life, as well as intricate spells and prayers designed to guide the soul on its journey to the gods. It is here, within these sacred walls, that the treasures of Egypt were kept, objects of immense spiritual and material value, meant to serve the deceased in the afterlife. The inclusion of these treasures was not an afterthought. They were carefully chosen and placed with the belief that they were essential to the dead person's continued existence beyond the grave. Every artifact had a purpose, whether it was a weapon for protection, a statue to represent a deity, or a piece of jewelry that symbolized power and wealth. But what was the real significance of these objects? Were they simply symbols of the pharaoh's wealth, or did they hold deeper, esoteric meanings? The religious beliefs of ancient Egypt were rooted in a complex system of deities, symbols, and rituals designed to ensure the successful passage of the deceased into the afterlife. At the heart of this belief system was the concept of ma'at, truth, order, and balance, which was maintained by the gods. To disturb the tombs of the dead was to disturb this sacred order, to violate the divine laws of the universe. The Egyptians believed that the pharaohs were divinely appointed to rule, but more importantly, they saw the king as a bridge between the gods and humanity. The pharaoh was both a ruler and a high priest, a figure who performed the necessary rituals to maintain cosmic order. This belief was so deeply ingrained in Egyptian culture that the idea of taking an artifact from the tomb of a pharaoh was seen as not just an act of theft, but a violation of sacred law itself. And yet, this is exactly what happened when explorers and tomb robbers began to uncover the treasures that had been hidden for thousands of years. When Europeans first began to excavate Egypt in the 19th century, they were driven not only by a desire for knowledge, but also by an insatiable thirst for wealth. The ancient Egyptians, with their highly advanced understanding of art, engineering, and spirituality, had left behind a treasure trove of priceless artifacts. These artifacts, once intended to accompany the dead into the afterlife, became highly sought after by collectors, archaeologists, and museums. It was during this time that Egyptomania, the intense fascination with all things Egyptian, swept through Europe and the Western world. With the discovery of Egyptian tombs came the discovery of their treasures: golden masks, jewels, statues of gods and animals, and intricate works of art that had never been seen before. These objects were unlike anything the West had ever encountered. To European eyes, they were not just treasures. They were symbols of a long-lost civilization that was both mysterious and enchanting. But the deeper significance of these objects was largely ignored in the rush to acquire them. What did these objects mean to the ancient Egyptians? Why had they been buried with such care? And what happened to them once they were taken from their sacred resting places? The answers to these questions can be found in the very nature of these treasures. For the ancient Egyptians, the objects they buried with the dead were not mere material possessions. They were tools for spiritual survival. The items placed in the tombs were imbued with the sacred power of the gods and were believed to provide the deceased with everything they needed in the afterlife. Some of these artifacts had symbolic meanings, representing various deities, while others were meant to serve as practical tools, such as a scepter that could be used to ward off evil spirits, or a mirror that would help the deceased navigate the dark realms of the afterlife. Jewelry, too, had powerful symbolism, representing both wealth and protection. But it was not only the material wealth of these artifacts that made them valuable. It was their connection to the divine. By taking these artifacts, the thieves and collectors were not just acquiring treasure. They were, in a sense, removing a piece of Egypt's spiritual legacy, a legacy that was believed to hold divine power. The ancient Egyptians did not view their treasures as mere items of value. They viewed them as essential for ensuring their passage into the afterlife. The items placed in tombs were thought to be animated by the power of the gods themselves. A statue of a god, for example, was believed to house the deity's spirit and provide protection to the deceased. A ritual knife or scepter was not simply a weapon. It was an instrument imbued with magical power, designed to ensure the deceased's safe journey through the dangerous realms of the afterlife. To disturb these objects was, in essence, to disturb the very order of the universe. And that is exactly what happened when the first tombs were plundered. The theft of these artifacts was not just an act of greed. It was an act of spiritual disruption. These objects were believed to hold power that could affect not just the deceased, but the living as well. To remove them from their sacred resting places was to steal not only material wealth, but divine favor. It's no wonder, then, that many of those who took part in these tomb robberies or in the excavation of Egypt's tombs met with untimely deaths or strange misfortunes. Some might dismiss these events as mere coincidence, but others see them as evidence of the curse that the ancient Egyptians believed would befall those who disturbed the resting places of the dead. The story of the stolen treasures of Egypt is not just one of theft and loss. It is a story of the clash between cultures, between the sacred beliefs of the ancient Egyptians and the material desires of the modern world. The treasures of Egypt were never meant to be seen by outsiders. They were not meant to be removed from their resting places. They were meant to be preserved, to serve the pharaohs and their followers in the afterlife. Yet, as explorers and tomb robbers sought to acquire these treasures, they unknowingly unleashed a chain of events that would carry the curse of Egypt's dead into the modern world. The treasures that were taken, whether by looters or by legitimate archaeologists, carry with them the weight of ancient knowledge, ancient power, and an ancient warning. And as we continue to uncover Egypt's lost treasures, we must ask ourselves, what are we really seeking? Riches, knowledge, or something far more dangerous? The temples and tombs of Egypt were not just grandiose monuments to the dead. They were sacred sites that embodied the soul of Egypt itself. And when those treasures were stolen, when they were removed from their sacred resting places, they carried with them not just the wealth of an ancient civilization, but the power of its gods, its kings, and its priests. The story of these stolen artifacts is not merely the story of a lost civilization. It is the story of a power that still resonates, a power that continues to haunt those who dare to disturb it. As we search for these artifacts, as we seek to understand their significance, we are not just looking into the past. We are reaching into the very heart of Egypt's mysterious legacy. And who knows what we might uncover when we unearth the past. The Age of Egyptomania is a pivotal chapter in the long and complicated history of the world's fascination with Egypt's ancient civilization. When we look back at the early 19th century, it's clear that a new era of exploration and discovery had dawned, a time when Europe's intellectual curiosity collided with an insatiable hunger for exotic treasures. As the ruins of ancient Egypt began to emerge from the sands of time, they captured the collective imagination of the Western world in a way that few other civilizations ever have. But it wasn't simply a curiosity for knowledge or admiration for ancient achievements that drove the surge in interest. It was a complex mix of colonial ambition, economic desires, and a deep-seated belief that there was something almost magical about Egypt's ancient world waiting to be uncovered. The real turning point came with the monumental expedition of Napoleon Bonaparte to Egypt in 1798. Though the campaign was ultimately a military failure, it ignited the spark that would fuel the intellectual and cultural movement known as Egyptomania. Napoleon's army, not content with simply conquering territory, brought along a team of scientists, scholars, and artists who meticulously documented the ancient monuments they encountered. The results of this endeavor would soon be compiled in the famous Description de l'Egypte, a massive multi-volume work that detailed the landscapes, monuments, artifacts, and culture of Egypt. This was a game changer. For the first time in history, the Western world had access to a comprehensive, systematic record of ancient Egypt's greatest wonders, and these discoveries would soon lead to a flood of interest in all things Egyptian. In the wake of Napoleon's campaign, the fascination with Egypt grew exponentially. Scholars, writers, and artists throughout Europe became obsessed with deciphering the secrets of the ancient civilization. Egypt was not just an archaeological marvel. It was a mysterious and exotic land filled with ancient knowledge, esoteric wisdom, and enigmatic rituals. The Egyptians were no longer just seen as a society of long-dead rulers. They were now revered as masters of science, architecture, and mystical thought. Egypt was portrayed as a cradle of knowledge that had once been the source of great discoveries in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and spiritual understanding. In a time when European nations were beginning to look outward, colonial ambitions were intertwined with a genuine desire to unlock the hidden mysteries of the East. As the 19th century progressed, Egyptomania began to spread throughout Europe like wildfire. The most significant driving force behind this fervor was the opening of Egypt's ancient tombs, which became something akin to a modern-day treasure hunt. A wave of exploration and excavation took hold of Egypt, with men like Jean-François Champollion, the French scholar who famously deciphered the Rosetta Stone, leading the charge. The breakthrough in understanding the hieroglyphic script provided access to an entirely new world of knowledge. Ancient texts that revealed religious rituals, philosophical ideas, and details of Egypt's once glorious past. Egypt, it seemed, held the keys to a forgotten world, and it was now within reach. For many, the discovery of hieroglyphics unlocked not just a language, but a key to understanding the mysteries of the universe itself. At the same time, the quest to unearth Egypt's treasures began to escalate. The early excavations of tombs in places like Luxor and the Valley of the Kings revealed an astonishing trove of artifacts. Glittering jewelry, intricate pottery, gold burial masks, statues of gods and pharaohs, and, most notably, the untouched tomb of the boy king, Tutankhamun. This moment, in 1922, was the culmination of years of feverish excavation, and it sent shockwaves through the global community. The treasures of Tutankhamun became the most iconic symbols of ancient Egypt's wealth and power, and the discovery of his tomb would forever change the way the world saw Egypt. In many ways, the tomb of Tutankhamun was the final piece of a puzzle that had been years in the making, a grand revelation of Egypt's ancient glories, treasures, and mysteries. However, the discovery of King Tut's tomb also marked the beginning of a darker chapter in Egypt's history of exploration. The fevered rush to acquire these ancient treasures was not driven purely by academic curiosity or the desire to preserve history. There was a much deeper, more complex motivation at play. The objects unearthed from Egypt's tombs were not just valuable because of their historical significance. They were viewed as gateways to immense wealth and power. To possess an artifact from the tomb of a pharaoh was to possess a piece of divinity itself. These treasures were thought to carry with them the magic and mystery of the ancient world, imbuing their owners with the knowledge and power of the gods. It is no surprise, then, that those who had access to these artifacts were not only archaeologists or museum curators, but also private collectors, royalty, and even secret societies who understood the esoteric value of these ancient objects. The Western world's thirst for Egypt's treasures and the subsequent removal of these objects from their sacred resting places is a story deeply intertwined with colonial history. The excavations conducted by both European and American archaeologists were often funded by wealthy patrons who saw the ancient artifacts as a way to demonstrate cultural superiority and to solidify their own status in a rapidly changing world. As Western powers began to dominate global trade and politics, they also sought to claim ownership of the world's most precious historical objects, including those of Egypt. The British Museum, the Louvre, and other prestigious institutions became the beneficiaries of these discoveries, proudly displaying Egyptian artifacts to the public. Yet, as these objects were displayed as cultural trophies, many were removed from Egypt without the consent of the local population or the Egyptian government. in many ways. The removal of these artifacts from their homeland was a form of cultural appropriation, a symptom of the imperialist mindset that viewed ancient civilizations as trophies to be collected and cataloged. For Egypt, a nation that had been under British colonial rule for much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, this was a painful process that stripped away not just treasures, but pieces of the nation's identity. To many Egyptians, the looting of their country's most sacred treasures felt like a continuation of centuries of exploitation and disregard for their culture. Even today, the legacy of colonial-era archaeology and the ongoing battle for the return of stolen artifacts remains a contentious issue. As Egyptomania spread across the Western world, it wasn't just about uncovering physical objects. It was also about uncovering the secrets of the past. Egypt's ancient wisdom, its mystical beliefs, and its connection to the divine took on a nearly mythic status. The Egyptians were seen as both a people of extraordinary intellectual achievement and a society that had knowledge far beyond what the modern world could comprehend. For some, Egypt held the keys to unlocking not just the mysteries of history, but the very mysteries of the universe. In this context, Egypt's ancient relics were viewed not just as artifacts, but as powerful symbols that could unlock hidden knowledge and power. Secret societies and occult groups, many of them influenced by Freemasonry, became particularly interested in the symbolic and esoteric significance of Egyptian culture. These groups believed that ancient Egypt's knowledge could be used to unlock hidden truths about human existence, the cosmos, and the nature of the divine. As the world's obsession with Egypt grew, the question arose, what was it that made Egypt so irresistible? What was it about this ancient civilization that made its treasures so valuable, so mysterious, and so powerful? It was the combination of Egypt's material wealth, its advanced knowledge of science and mathematics, and its deep connection to the divine that made its culture so compelling. The Egyptians had mastered the art of preserving the body after death, creating monumental structures that have withstood the ravages of time, and developing systems of knowledge that were centuries ahead of their time. But it was also the Egyptians' connection to the divine that made their civilization so alluring. Egypt was not just a place of material wealth. It was a place where the gods walked among men, where the pharaohs were seen as divine beings who could bridge the gap between the mortal and the immortal. The Western world's fascination with Egypt was, in many ways, a search for something deeper, a longing for lost knowledge, for understanding, and for the mysteries of the universe. The artifacts taken from Egypt were not just pieces of a material culture. They were seen as keys to unlocking ancient wisdom that could transform the world. The story of Egyptomania is not just one of historical discovery. It is a story of the search for power, for spiritual understanding, and for the desire to possess that which was once thought to be lost to time. As the ancient relics of Egypt were unearthed and brought into the light, they became more than just objects. They became symbols of a deeper mystery, a mystery that continues to captivate and intrigue us to this day. The discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 stands as one of the most significant events in the history of archaeology, not just because of the wealth of treasures it revealed, but because it ignited a frenzy of intrigue and mystery that continues to this day. When Howard Carter, the British archaeologist, and his team unearthed the tomb in the Valley of the Kings, they stumbled upon a moment frozen in time, an ancient tomb untouched for over 3,000 years. The riches found inside Tutankhamun's tomb were staggering. The golden death mask, weighing more than 20 pounds, was just the beginning. Carter and his team uncovered chests filled with jewelry, a golden throne, intricately decorated chariots, weapons, musical instruments, and countless other treasures, each more breathtaking than the last. These objects weren't just material possessions. They were items of profound spiritual and cultural significance, meant to accompany the young king in his journey to the afterlife. The tomb's discovery was supposed to be a moment of immense academic triumph. Yet, almost immediately, it became entangled in a darker story, one that would soon spiral into the realm of the supernatural, as the famous curse of the pharaohs seemed to take hold. The first signs of something amiss came soon after the tomb was opened. Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy British patron who funded Carter's excavation, was one of the first to visit the tomb after its discovery. On April 5, 1923, just months after the tomb's opening, Lord Carnarvon died suddenly from infected mosquito bite. His death was the first in a string of mysterious passings and misfortunes that would plague those involved in the tomb's discovery. Within a year of opening the tomb, several other individuals connected to the excavation, including George Gould, the American millionaire who accompanied Carnarvon to Egypt, and Arthur Weigall, the British Egyptologist, also met untimely deaths. The public, eager for an explanation, quickly seized upon the idea that these deaths were not mere coincidence, but the result of a curse. The curse of the pharaohs, an ancient belief that any intruder who disturbed a royal tomb would face divine retribution, had long been a part of Egypt's mythology. But now, it seemed, the curse had manifested itself in a chilling and inexplicable way. The death of Lord Carnarvon was especially striking, as he had been one of the key figures in funding and supporting the excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb. His sudden passing, so close to the discovery, fueled the belief that the curse was real, and it captured the imagination of the public. Media outlets around the world began to report on the so-called curse of the pharaohs, and the tragic events surrounding those involved in the tomb's opening were sensationalized. The idea that the ancient Egyptians had placed a curse on their tombs to protect them from thieves and desecrators was not new, but the string of unexplained deaths connected to Tutankhamun's tomb brought the legend to the forefront of popular consciousness. As the news spread, people began to ask, was it mere superstition, or was there something more to these strange deaths? What made the story even more intriguing was the rapid succession of deaths that seemed to follow the opening of the tomb. As if by design, the deaths occurred in close proximity to one another, each one casting further suspicion on the idea of the curse. Some of the most notable figures to succumb to the supposed curse were not just wealthy patrons or the archaeologists themselves, but also those who had played seemingly minor roles in the discovery. A British radiologist named Sir Bruce Ingram, whose wife had been a close associate of Lord Carnarvon, lost his home to a mysterious fire just after visiting the tomb. His wife, Lady Ingram, was reportedly spared only through sheer luck. Another person who experienced unexplained misfortune was the Egyptologist James Breasted, who had written extensively about Egypt's ancient culture. His life was marked by a series of personal tragedies after visiting the tomb. It wasn't just deaths, either. People who had spent time near the tomb or involved in its excavation began to suffer from strange and unnerving ailments, headaches, nightmares, and even sudden, inexplicable fevers. The media latched onto these stories, and as each new incident occurred, they seemed to confirm the idea that there was some malevolent force at work connected to the ancient tomb and its treasures. The curse of the pharaohs had now been thrust into the global spotlight, and many began to speculate whether the ancient Egyptians had truly placed a supernatural safeguard on their tombs. Some even suggested that the curse was not a simple superstition, but a carefully orchestrated effort by the priests of ancient Egypt, intended to protect the sanctity of the tombs and their treasures from the greed of future generations. The idea of a curse attached to the tomb of Tutankhamun resonated with the public in a way that few other stories ever have. It was as if the ancient world, in all its grandeur and mystery, had reached out from the past and was taking revenge on the present. This notion was not merely a passing fancy. It became a part of the modern mythology surrounding the tomb of King Tut. The curse became so ingrained in the public consciousness that, years later, even those who came in contact with the artifacts or the remains of the tomb began to fear the supposed supernatural repercussions. As more excavations took place, with teams now studying and cataloging Tutankhamun's treasures, many who handled the artifacts experienced their own streaks of bad luck. However, not all of the so-called victims of the curse were directly involved with the excavation. For example, the infamous death of American businessman and treasure hunter Jack "Lucky" Hunter, who came into possession of Tutankhamun's gold-plated dagger. only to find himself facing a run of bad fortune, lent further credence to the idea that the curse was not simply a legend. Hunter's misfortunes were well documented, and his story further fueled the growing fear surrounding the treasures of Egypt. At the heart of the narrative surrounding the curse of Tutankhamun lies the mystery of why the ancient Egyptians would have created such a powerful safeguard in the first place. Ancient Egyptians believed deeply in the afterlife. The concept of the afterlife was so central to their worldview that it shaped nearly every aspect of their culture. The tombs, temples, and burial rituals were meticulously designed to ensure that the deceased would not only be protected in the afterlife, but that they would retain their power and influence over the living world. The treasures buried with the pharaohs were not just markers of status or wealth. They were seen as essential for ensuring a safe journey into the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul required these items to protect it from the dangers that lay ahead, and to ensure it could maintain its identity in the next world. It was this belief that might explain why the tombs were often protected by elaborate curses or warnings. The idea was that anyone who dared disturb the resting place of a pharaoh would incur the wrath of the gods or the protective spirits of the deceased. In Tutankhamun's case, this idea seemed to come to life in a most dramatic and public way. The death of Lord Carnarvon, followed by the series of misfortunes that befell others connected to the tomb, was seen as tangible proof of the power of these ancient curses. Whether or not the curse was actually supernatural, or whether it was a string of unlucky coincidences, the idea of a mystical retribution captivated the public. Despite all the sensationalized stories of death and misfortune, many scholars have argued that the so-called curse of the pharaohs was simply a result of coincidence, bad luck, or the fact that the people involved were already living in a time of great uncertainty. But as time went on, the myth of the curse only grew stronger. In fact, some have speculated that the very stories of the curse, whether true or not, serve as a warning to future generations, a cultural lesson about the dangers of greed, the desecration of sacred sites, and the ultimate price of disturbing the past. The curse became more than just a myth. It became a cultural marker, a reminder of the sacredness of Egypt's ancient treasures, and the belief that there were some things in this world that were never meant to be disturbed. In the years following the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, the curse continued to haunt not just the people directly involved in the excavation, but the very idea of Egypt itself. The notion of the curse transformed into something larger, an embodiment of the mysterious, untouchable power that Egypt had once wielded, and the deep spiritual connection that the ancient Egyptians had with their gods and their afterlife. What began as a series of tragic and unexplained deaths slowly morphed into a broader, more symbolic idea that the ancient past was not something to be tampered with, but rather something that demanded respect. Whether one believes in the supernatural aspect of the curse or not, it is clear that the death and misfortune associated with Tutankhamun's tomb continues to play a crucial role in the modern mythos surrounding Egypt's ancient civilization. The legacy of the curse is a reminder of the timeless power of Egypt's past, a power that, to this day, continues to haunt the world. As the years passed and the frenzy around the tomb of Tutankhamun subsided, the public's obsession with Egypt's ancient relics did not fade. If anything, the discoveries only deepened the mysteries, as the thefts and the question of what happened to the other artifacts that had once filled Egypt's tombs began to take on new significance. Although King Tut's tomb and its treasures were unearthed with great fanfare, many of the other royal tombs had already been looted long before archaeologists began their work. The treasures that had once belonged to Egypt's pharaohs have been taken, hidden, or lost throughout history, and their absence only added to the growing mythos surrounding the country's ancient civilization. However, some relics, particularly those of immense power and symbolic weight, were never truly lost. Instead, they were scattered across the globe, hidden away in private collections or secret locations, becoming the subject of a fascinating web of theories, thefts, and conspiracies. The question of where Egypt's lost treasures truly ended up is one of the most enduring mysteries of modern archaeology. The assumption, often, was that the treasures of Egypt were merely relics of a bygone age, precious objects that had lost their purpose and had become the property of museums, collectors, and the powerful elite of the Western world. But there are many who believe that some artifacts, especially those connected to Egypt's powerful pharaohs, were never intended to leave the country, and that their removal was part of something far more nefarious. The notion that these artifacts were more than just valuable items, that they were sacred, imbued with the power of the gods themselves, led to the idea that these objects could have been hidden or hoarded away, not just as a means of acquiring wealth, but to protect the secrets they held. Some artifacts, especially the ones linked to the ancient Egyptian priesthood, were rumored to have been stolen during or after the invasion of Egypt by foreign powers. The looting that took place after the decline of Egypt's imperial power in the early centuries of the Common Era is often seen as one of the key moments when Egypt's most sacred treasures were lost. Yet, many of these objects were not taken by simple thieves, but by armies and conquerors who knew their significance. When Alexander the Great marched into Egypt in the 4th century BC, he was not only claiming territory, but also seizing symbols of divine power. The same can be said for the Roman Empire, whose legions ransacked temples and tombs in search of riches and sacred items. But these treasures weren't just stolen for their monetary value. To the conquerors, they were a way to legitimize their own power, to claim dominion over the ancient gods of Egypt, and to establish their rule over a land that was both mystically and historically powerful. The concept of taking these artifacts was more than an act of conquest. It was an attempt to absorb the power of Egypt into their own realms. After Egypt fell under British colonial rule, this idea of absorbing the spiritual power of Egypt became even more apparent. British explorers, such as Howard Carter, were not only driven by academic curiosity, but by the desire to unearth treasures that would solidify their country's claim over the Egyptian legacy. At the time of Carter's famous discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, Egypt was a British protectorate, and the removal of Egyptian artifacts from the country became something of a cultural appropriation. Artifacts that were once central to Egypt's ancient spiritual and religious practices were now dispersed across the world, taken from their original context and placed in the hands of wealthy individuals, museums, and institutions. It was a form of symbolic dominance, a way for colonial powers to assert their superiority by possessing the very elements of the culture they had conquered. The significance of these objects cannot be understated. Many of the artifacts removed from Egypt were believed to be more than just material possessions. They were considered vehicles of power, capable of influencing the forces of life and death. To some, these objects were seen as conduits to the divine, their power deriving from the gods themselves. The ancient Egyptians believed that the pharaohs were divine beings, chosen by the gods to rule over the land. The wealth and treasures buried with the pharaohs were meant to sustain them in the afterlife, to ensure their continued power in the realms beyond death. But for those who removed these items from their tombs, whether out of greed, curiosity, or a desire to harness their power, the consequences were often severe. The so-called curse of the pharaohs was not just a superstition. It was a warning embedded within the very essence of the objects themselves. This theory gains weight when considering the curse-like events that followed the removal of Egypt's treasures. For example, in the decades following the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, several key figures involved in the excavation died under mysterious or tragic circumstances. Lord Carnarvon, the man who funded the excavation, died shortly after the tomb's opening, a death that some attribute to the supposed curse. But it wasn't just Lord Carnarvon. Numerous individuals connected to the tomb's discovery experienced untimely deaths, illnesses, or other misfortunes. As the bodies of Egypt's kings were disturbed and their treasures removed from their sacred resting places, the curse seemed to follow. And yet, this wasn't just a story of death and bad luck. It was also a story about how these stolen objects seemed to carry an energy that transcended time and space. It was as if the objects, removed from their sacred contexts, were continuing to exert their power, affecting the lives of those who came into contact with them. Over time, the mystery surrounding these stolen treasures grew, as it became clear that many of the objects taken from Egypt's tombs were never truly lost. Some have been rumored to be hidden in private collections, locked away in vaults by individuals or institutions that understand the power these artifacts possess. Others, such as the famous golden objects belonging to King Tut, have ended up in the world's most renowned museums. Yet, the question remains, how much of Egypt's ancient power still resides within these artifacts? Are they truly just objects of historical interest, or do they carry something more, something beyond our understanding? As Egypt continues to struggle with the return of its stolen treasures, the issue of cultural heritage becomes even more complicated. The Egyptian government has been calling for the return of its artifacts for decades, but many of these relics remain in the possession of foreign museums, collectors, and institutions. The debate over whether these treasures should be returned to Egypt or remain in the West continues to this day. To some, the artifacts are pieces of humanity's shared history, representing the intellectual and artistic achievements of a civilization that once flourished along the Nile. But to others, these artifacts are sacred, part of a heritage that was stolen and should be returned to their rightful home. While the debate rages on, there are those who argue that the true power of these objects cannot be fully understood or harnessed unless they are returned to their proper place. Egypt, the land of the pharaohs. These artifacts are not mere historical curiosities, but potent symbols of Egypt's ancient spiritual power, and only by restoring them to their homeland can the world truly understand the legacy they represent. There is also the belief that the curse of the pharaohs was not just a superstition, but a safeguard, a protection against those who would seek to misuse the divine power contained within these relics. The removal of these artifacts, and the misfortune that followed, was not just a series of coincidences. It was a consequence of violating the sacred balance between the living and the dead. One cannot help but wonder if the mystery surrounding the lost treasures of Egypt is far from over. As more relics resurface and more stolen artifacts are returned to Egypt, the question remains, what will happen when the last of these treasures are finally returned? Will the curse end, or will the artifacts continue to exert their power, keeping the ancient spirit of Egypt alive in ways we are only beginning to understand? Could it be that the true significance of these objects is not merely historical, but spiritual, and that their power continues to influence the world today? In this tangled web of artifacts, treasures, and curses, the story of Egypt's stolen legacy is far from finished. The allure of these relics continues to captivate the imagination of those who seek to uncover the mysteries of the past. But the question remains, what will the future hold when the secrets of Egypt's pharaohs are finally revealed? Will the world be ready to face the consequences of uncovering these ancient powers, or will the curse of the pharaohs continue to haunt us for centuries to come? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain. The story of Egypt's stolen treasures is far from over. The allure of ancient Egypt is, at its core, a story of power, mystery, and divine influence. For centuries, Egypt has been at the center of the world's fascination with the unknown, not just because of its incredible achievements in architecture, art, and mathematics, but also because of its unique relationship with the supernatural and the divine. From a moment one steps into the shadow of the Great Pyramids or gazes upon the intricate hieroglyphics that adorn the walls of ancient temples, it becomes clear that Egypt was not just a civilization. It was a place where the line between the earthly and the divine was blurred. This connection to the divine, especially in the realm of Egyptian religion and their burial practices, is one of the most enigmatic aspects of their culture. But when these sacred artifacts, objects designed to bridge the gap between the gods and the human world, are stolen or lost, what happens to the power they once held? The answer, for many, lies in the theory of the curse. The ancient Egyptians were a deeply spiritual people who believed that their rulers and priests held a special connection to the divine. The pharaohs, seen as living gods, had an extraordinary responsibility. They not only ruled the land but were responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. This order was critical not just to the functioning of society, but to the continued harmony between the gods and the world of the living. It was believed that the pharaoh's role extended beyond death, with elaborate burial rituals designed to ensure their safe passage into the afterlife, where they would continue their divine role in the realm of the gods. The tombs of the pharaohs, filled with treasures and sacred objects, were seen as a direct reflection of this belief. These were not just material possessions. They were thought to be imbued with divine power, meant to sustain the deceased ruler as they journeyed through the underworld and into eternity. This belief was not limited to the pharaohs alone. Nobles, priests, and anyone who held a sacred role in Egyptian society were buried with objects that were meant to ensure their safe journey and spiritual protection. The tombs, temples, and other sacred sites were therefore not just physical locations. They were seen as spiritual sanctuaries, where the deceased could maintain their power and authority beyond death. It is within this sacred context that the theft of these objects becomes not just a material crime, but a spiritual one. The ancient Egyptians believed that their tombs were protected by powerful magic, and that any disturbance of the tombs or removal of these sacred objects would invoke the wrath of the gods. This belief in divine retribution was so strong that it became embedded in their burial practices. The Egyptians would often inscribe curses on the walls of tombs or on the objects placed inside them, warning would-be tomb robbers of the consequences they would face if they dared to steal from the gods. These curses were believed to be powerful, capable of causing harm to those who violated the sanctity of the tombs. Despite these warnings, tomb robbers and adventurers were relentless in their search for Egypt's treasures. Over the centuries, the tombs of the pharaohs were raided, and many of the most valuable artifacts were lost or stolen. For most of history, the fate of these stolen objects remained a mystery. While some treasures were discovered and returned to museums or collections, others seemed to vanish without a trace, leaving behind only rumors and legends of their power. But it is not just the loss of the physical objects that has contributed to the ongoing fascination with Egypt's stolen treasures. The very idea that these objects were imbued with a kind of spiritual energy has been a constant source of speculation. For many, the theft of these objects was not merely the taking of gold, jewelry, and statues. It was the stealing of something much more powerful, the divine essence of ancient Egypt itself. The belief in the divine power of these objects has been amplified by the many strange and unexplained events that have surrounded the discovery and theft of Egyptian artifacts. The so-called Curse of the Pharaohs became a widely discussed phenomenon after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. When Lord Carnarvon, the patron who financed the excavation, died suddenly shortly after the tomb's opening, the media quickly seized upon the idea that he had fallen victim to the curse. Over the following years, other individuals connected to the tomb's discovery also suffered untimely deaths or bizarre misfortunes. These events, combined with the ancient belief that the gods would punish those who desecrated the tombs, led many to believe that the artifacts taken from these sacred sites carried with them a dangerous and vengeful power. But it wasn't just the immediate aftermath of the tomb's opening that led to this belief. The strange occurrences that followed were not limited to just the death of a few individuals. They seemed to extend to those who handled the objects themselves. For example, many people involved in the transfer and exhibition of Tutankhamun's treasures reported experiencing bad luck, health issues, or even accidents shortly after coming into contact with the artifacts. These strange occurrences have fueled speculation that the curse was not just a superstition, but a very real force that protected the power contained within the objects. But what was it about these objects that made them so potent? The answer lies in the spiritual significance that the ancient Egyptians placed on them. The tombs and temples of Egypt were filled with sacred objects that were designed to protect the deceased in their journey through the afterlife and to ensure that they remained powerful and influential in the world of the living. Some objects, like statues and amulets, were designed to act as protectors, warding off evil spirits or guiding the soul through the trials of the underworld. Other objects, like the famous golden death mask of Tutankhamun, were imbued with both spiritual and symbolic significance, representing the pharaoh's divine status and his eternal connection to the gods. The Egyptians believed that these objects were not just material representations of power, They were the very vessels of divine energy. The removal of these objects was not just the theft of precious items. It was the theft of divine power itself. In the context of the modern world, the idea that these objects might still carry some form of spiritual or supernatural energy has persisted. As Egypt's ancient treasures have been dispersed around the globe, from the British Museum to the Louvre, the question remains, what happens to the power of these objects when they are taken from their sacred resting places? Do they lose their potency, or do they continue to hold the power they once had? Some believe that these objects, far from losing their influence, continue to exert a subtle but powerful force on those who come into contact with them. The repeated misfortunes that have befallen those involved in the theft, excavation, or exhibition of these objects suggest that the ancient Egyptians may have been right in their belief that these treasures held a power that could not be easily controlled. The spread of these objects into private collections has only added to the mystery. Many of the most valuable and sacred relics of Egypt remain hidden from public view, locked away in the hands of private collectors who often choose to keep their acquisitions out of the public eye. These secret collections, in many ways, have become the modern equivalents of the ancient tombs, places where the power of Egypt's treasures remains concealed, waiting for those who dare to unlock their secrets. It is believed that these private collections are often home to some of the most sacred and powerful artifacts, objects that were not meant to be displayed or studied, but were instead meant to be kept hidden from the world. This secrecy has only deepened the mystery of Egypt's stolen treasures. In some cases, these private collectors may even go so far as to protect their holdings through occult rituals or secretive ceremonies, believing that by doing so, they can harness the power of these ancient objects. The idea that the power of these artifacts is still alive, and that it can be manipulated or harnessed, is a fascinating one that continues to captivate the imagination of those who study ancient Egypt. But even as these objects remain hidden, they continue to cast a long shadow over the world of archaeology and history as the search for Egypt's lost treasures continues. The notion that Egypt's stolen artifacts carry a power that transcends time and space is more than just an academic curiosity. It is a reflection of humanity's deep-seated desire to connect with something greater than ourselves. The ancient Egyptians understood the power of these objects, and they believed that by creating them, they could preserve their power and influence for eternity. The removal of these objects, whether by thieves, explorers, or collectors, has led to the belief that the objects still retain that power, even in the modern world. But as the search for Egypt's stolen treasures continues, the question remains, what is the true nature of the power contained within these artifacts? And what will happen when these treasures are finally returned to their rightful home, to the land of the pharaohs where they belong? Only time will reveal the answers to these questions, but one thing is certain. The mystery of Egypt's stolen treasures is far from over. The legacy of Egypt's ancient power, its connection to the divine, and the secrets of its lost artifacts continue to hold sway over the modern world, pulling us deeper into the mystery of one of history's most captivating civilizations. As the story of Egypt's lost treasures and stolen artifacts unfolds, it becomes clear that the quest for these objects was not solely about the desire for wealth or the academic pursuit of knowledge. The allure of Egypt's ancient artifacts reaches deeper, touching on themes of power, forbidden knowledge, and the unspoken forces that shape our understanding of the world. From the moment Western explorers began to dig into Egypt's tombs, the desire to unearth something extraordinary was not just driven by curiosity. It was also motivated by a deep and almost mystical belief that Egypt's relics contained not only historical truths, but secret knowledge that could alter the course of human understanding. These treasures were viewed by many not as mere relics of the past, but as vessels carrying the hidden wisdom of the ancients, capable of unlocking mysteries far beyond the comprehension of the modern world. The truth of Egypt's legacy, however, is far more complex than what is often presented in mainstream narratives. For centuries, the artifacts of Egypt, especially those connected to the tombs of its most powerful rulers, were removed from their sacred resting places. The significance of these treasures was often dismissed or misunderstood by those who sought them. It wasn't just about the gold or the jewels. It was about the knowledge embedded in these objects, a kind of esoteric wisdom that had been passed down through generations of priests, pharaohs, and mystics. The Egyptians believed that their kings and queens, as well as their sacred relics, held the key to understanding the universe's deepest truths. The removal of these sacred items, therefore, represented not just a theft of material wealth, but an act of spiritual violation, one that severed the link between the living and the divine. The belief in the divine power of Egypt's relics was not confined to the ancient Egyptians alone. It resonated with explorers, treasure hunters, and scholars who sought these artifacts for their own purposes. The idea that these objects might hold the key to unlocking ancient wisdom, to understanding the mysteries of life, death, and the cosmos, was too tempting to resist. In many ways, the fascination with Egypt's treasures mirrors a larger historical and cultural trend, the desire to control knowledge and power. Throughout history, those who have possessed knowledge have held power. Ancient Egypt, with its advanced understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture, represented a civilization that had unlocked the secrets of the universe. The artifacts buried with the pharaohs were more than just cultural relics. They were, in the eyes of many, tangible links to that knowledge, preserving the secrets of the ancients for all eternity. And so, when these artifacts were removed from their tombs, they became symbols of something greater than themselves, a symbol of the longing to access the hidden knowledge of the past. The discovery of these treasures, and the subsequent removal of many of them from Egypt, has raised significant ethical and moral questions. Were these objects truly meant to be taken from Egypt, or were they intended to remain in their sacred resting places, where they could continue to serve their intended purpose? The actions of the early explorers and archaeologists who unearthed these relics were often motivated by the belief that they were contributing to the greater good, that by studying these artifacts, they would uncover the secrets of the ancient world and further the cause of human progress. Yet, as time has passed and the full implications of these actions have become clear, it is evident that the removal of these treasures from Egypt has caused irreparable harm, not only to the integrity of Egypt's cultural heritage, but also to the spiritual legacy of the civilization itself. The very notion of Egypt's lost artifacts has become a central theme in the ongoing debate about the return of cultural property. The idea that these objects were stolen, either by colonial powers or by private collectors seeking to profit from them, is a source of deep controversy. For many Egyptians, the removal of these relics represents a profound injustice, an act of cultural appropriation that not only stripped their country of its heritage, but also robbed them of their connection to the ancient past. The question of whether these artifacts should be returned to Egypt is a difficult one, as it involves not only questions of cultural ownership and historical justice, but also the practicalities of global museums and collections. Some argue that these artifacts should remain in Western museums, where they can be studied and appreciated by a global audience, while others insist that they must be returned to Egypt, where they belong. Regardless of the outcome, the fact remains that these treasures are far more than just objects. They're symbols of a deeper cultural and spiritual connection that transcends borders and time. For those who study ancient Egypt, the significance of these artifacts goes beyond their material value. They represent the embodiment of a civilization that understood the mysteries of the universe in ways that modern society still struggles to comprehend. The Egyptians believed that their kings and gods were part of a divine plan, one that stretched far beyond the limits of the physical world. The objects buried with them were not mere possessions. They were sacred tools, designed to protect the pharaohs on their journey through the afterlife and to ensure their continued power in the realm of the gods. The sacredness of these objects cannot be overstated. From the intricate jewelry to the beautifully painted sarcophagi, each piece was crafted with the intent to serve a higher purpose, to connect the material world with the divine. The rituals and beliefs surrounding these objects reflect a deep understanding of life, death, and the cosmos that modern scholars are still only beginning to understand. This connection between Egypt's lost treasures and the mystical beliefs of the ancient world is one of the key reasons why the fascination with these artifacts endures. Many believe that these objects are not simply relics of a bygone age, but are imbued with a kind of spiritual power that can influence the course of human events. For those who have studied the occult and the mystical traditions of ancient Egypt, these artifacts are seen as more than just material possessions. They are tools for accessing hidden knowledge, unlocking the mysteries of existence, and perhaps even influencing the world in ways that are not fully understood. Some even believe that these objects, especially those associated with the pharaohs and the priesthood, were not just symbols of divine power, but actual conduits to that power, gateways through which the ancient Egyptians could communicate with the gods. The belief that Egypt's treasures carry hidden power has led to a number of conspiracy theories surrounding their fate. Some believe that certain powerful individuals or secret societies possess knowledge of the true power of these artifacts and are actively seeking to control them. The idea that these objects are not merely cultural relics, but instruments of power, is a notion that has captivated the imaginations of many throughout history. Whether or not one subscribes to such theories, it is undeniable that the loss of these treasures represents something far more significant than just the theft of valuable objects. It is the loss of a connection to an ancient wisdom that has been hidden, forgotten, or deliberately suppressed. The modern fascination with Egypt's lost artifacts is not just a curiosity about the past. It is a search for something greater. It is an attempt to understand the mysteries of the universe, to unlock the hidden knowledge that the ancient Egyptians are believed to have possessed. In many ways, this quest mirrors the search for meaning and truth that has driven human civilization for centuries. The belief that Egypt's treasures hold the key to understanding the divine, to unlocking the secrets of life and death, continues to resonate today. For those who believe in the spiritual power of these objects, the question remains, what will happen when the last of these treasures are finally returned to Egypt? Will the ancient knowledge they represent be unlocked, or will it remain forever hidden, its secrets buried in the sands of time? As the debate continues over the fate of Egypt's stolen treasures, one thing is certain. The legacy of ancient Egypt is far from over. The artifacts that have been removed from their sacred resting places may have been lost to Egypt, but they have not been forgotten. The quest for these treasures, for the knowledge and power they represent, will continue as long as humanity seeks to understand the mysteries of the past. The artifacts of Egypt are more than just physical objects. They're symbols of a deeper connection to the divine, a connection that transcends time and space. As long as the mysteries of ancient Egypt remain unsolved, the search for its lost treasures will continue, driven by a desire to uncover the hidden wisdom of the ancients and unlock the power that lies within. The story of Egypt's stolen treasures is far from finished. It is a story that will continue to captivate and intrigue as humanity strives to understand the power of the ancient world. The saga of Egypt's lost and stolen artifacts has been a fascinating and often mysterious tale, one that stretches far beyond the boundaries of time and space. From the first discoveries by early explorers and archaeologists to the illicit excavations and thefts that followed, these treasures have ignited both the imagination and the desire for power in those who sought them. However, it's not just the material value of these artifacts that makes them so captivating. It's the belief that they hold something far greater, the keys to ancient knowledge, spiritual power, and the mysteries of the universe. Over the years, the concept of these treasures as conduits of mystical forces has gained as much, if not more, significance than their actual historical importance. As time has passed, Egypt's lost treasures have come to symbolize something much larger, an almost esoteric energy that continues to influence our understanding of history and the unseen realms that connect us to it. The ongoing search for these treasures, and the belief that they carry something beyond the physical, is intertwined with the history of Egypt's spiritual and religious practices, as well as with the larger human desire to grasp the divine. This quest for something beyond the material is what has made Egypt's stolen artifacts not just historical relics, but objects of immense spiritual value. The ancient Egyptians themselves believed that their pharaohs were divine, chosen by the gods to rule over the living and the dead. For them, death was not an end, but a passage into an afterlife, and the tombs, filled with treasures and sacred objects, were seen as gateways to that realm. The objects buried with the pharaohs were not mere decorations. They were thought to be essential tools in ensuring the king's continued power, influence, and spiritual well-being in the afterlife. The belief that these objects held magical and divine properties is at the heart of the mystery surrounding their theft. These treasures weren't just valuable in a material sense. They were thought to embody the very essence of the gods themselves, ensuring the deceased ruler's safe passage and continued reign. For centuries, the treasures of Egypt were preserved in their tombs, untouched and revered. Yet, with the advent of exploration and archaeology in the modern era, these sacred relics began to disappear. The search for these treasures was not only about uncovering the past. It was about attempting to unlock the divine secrets the ancient Egyptians had hidden away. For many of the archaeologists and treasure hunters involved in the excavations, there was the belief that these objects held more than just historical value. They held keys to understanding life's most profound mysteries. Some even believed that the relics contained knowledge that could alter the course of human civilization. The allure of this hidden knowledge drove a worldwide race to uncover Egypt's sacred artifacts. But this race was not without consequences. The history of Egypt's stolen artifacts is also a story of cultural appropriation and exploitation. Western powers, particularly during the height of colonialism, viewed Egypt as a land rich with untapped resources, both material and intellectual. The removal of these sacred objects was often seen as a way to assert power and dominance over a civilization that had once been a mighty empire. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, Egypt was under foreign rule, first by the French and later by the British. Throughout this period, many of Egypt's most prized artifacts were taken from their original locations and shipped off to museums and private collections in Europe and America. While some of these objects were taken with the intention of preserving them for study, others were simply looted, removed from the cultural context that gave them their power and significance. The displacement of these sacred items was not merely a loss of material wealth. It was an act of cultural erasure, an attempt to sever Egypt's connection to its own past. This colonial theft, however, was not just about taking physical objects. It was about the control of knowledge, power, and history. The belief that these artifacts carry divine properties extended beyond just the religious or cultural significance. They were seen as keys to unlocking ancient wisdom. When the treasures of Egypt were removed, many believed that they held a kind of forbidden knowledge, the acquisition of which could grant extraordinary power. This belief in the hidden power of these objects is one of the reasons why the debate over their return to Egypt remains so contentious today. Many in the West, particularly in the institutions that hold these artifacts, argue that the treasures should remain in their collections, where they can be studied, appreciated, and made accessible to the world. However, there's also a growing movement to return these objects to Egypt, where they belong, and where they can once again be connected to the land and the culture that created them. The loss of Egypt's treasures, particularly in the context of colonialism and modern exploration, raises a profound question. What happens when ancient objects are removed from their sacred context? The Egyptians themselves believed that their gods inhabited the objects placed in tombs and temples, and that removing these objects would disrupt the spiritual order of the world. For centuries, these objects had been part of a carefully orchestrated system, designed to ensure the continuity of divine power and order. When these objects were taken, it was not just the physical item that was lost, it was the spiritual energy they carried. This is what has led many to believe that the objects are more than just symbols of Egypt's history. They are living, energetic entities that continue to exert influence long after their removal. Over time, the mythos surrounding Egypt's lost treasures has only grown. The belief that these objects hold power beyond their physical form has been reinforced by strange and unexplained occurrences surrounding their discovery and movement. The so-called curse of the pharaohs, which is said to have been placed upon those who disturbed the tombs of Egypt's kings, became a central part of this mystery. The curse was famously linked to the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, when Lord Carnarvon, the The British aristocrat who funded the excavation died suddenly from an infected mosquito bite. His death was followed by a series of misfortunes and untimely deaths among those connected to the tomb, which fueled the belief that the artifacts and the tombs themselves were protected by an unseen supernatural force. While some skeptics dismissed these events as mere coincidence, others saw them as evidence that the treasures were not just physical items, but were imbued with the very essence of the divine, carrying with them the wrath of the gods upon those who dare disturb them. This belief in the spiritual power of Egypt's treasures has persisted to this day, feeding the notion that these artifacts are not merely relics of the past, but powerful objects that continue to shape the present. This idea has been further perpetuated by the many conspiracy theories and myths that have sprung up around the artifacts. Some suggest that these objects hold the key to unlocking a deeper understanding of the universe or the power to manipulate it. The belief that the ancient Egyptians understood the forces of the cosmos in ways that modern science has yet to grasp has fueled speculation that the artifacts were imbued with a secret knowledge that has been hidden from the world. These objects are seen not just as representations of Egypt's past, but as symbols of a hidden truth that remains locked away, waiting to be discovered by those who are worthy. Today, as Egypt continues its efforts to reclaim its stolen artifacts, the question remains, what will happen when these treasures are returned? Will the objects retain their power, or will they simply be museum pieces, stripped of the mystique and spiritual energy they once held? The return of these objects is not just a matter of cultural ownership or historical justice. It is a matter of restoring the sacred connection between the artifacts and the land that gave them life. As Egypt reclaims its ancient treasures, it is not merely reclaiming its heritage. It is reawakening the spiritual legacy of the civilization that once ruled the Nile. The idea that these artifacts hold a kind of power that transcends time and space is what continues to fuel the fascination with Egypt's lost treasures. The belief that they're connected to a deeper understanding of the cosmos, that they hold knowledge that has been hidden for millennia, is what keeps the mystery alive. Whether or not these artifacts truly possess supernatural powers is uncertain. But what is undeniable is the deep and lasting impact they have had on human culture and consciousness. The search for Egypt's stolen treasures is not just a search for material wealth. It is a search for something far greater. The keys to understanding the ancient knowledge that still pulses at the heart of Egypt's legacy. As long as this mystery remains unsolved, Egypt's lost treasures will continue to captivate, inspire, and intrigue, drawing us deeper into the ancient world and the hidden forces that shaped it. The narrative surrounding Egypt's lost treasures is not just a tale of objects or artifacts. It is in many ways a story of the deep human desire to understand the mysteries of the past, the divine, and the unknown. As the centuries passed, these treasures became more than just relics. They became symbols of something much larger, something greater than their material worth. The treasures of Egypt, especially those buried in the tombs of its pharaohs, were often seen as vessels of divine power, relics that were imbued with the energies of the gods themselves. The theft and loss of these treasures, especially during times of conquest and exploration, raise questions that continue to haunt modern history. What happened to these objects, and what forces might have been set in motion as a result of their removal? For centuries, Egypt was considered by many to be the cradle of civilization, a land of extraordinary mysteries and advanced knowledge. The ancient Egyptians understood the spiritual world in ways that modern society can scarcely begin to comprehend. They believed that the physical world was only one part of a greater cosmic order, one that was ruled by the gods and maintained through the correct rituals and practices. These rituals, many of which were intricately tied to death and the afterlife, were seen as essential for ensuring the continued balance between the gods, the living, and the dead. The pharaohs, as divine rulers, were not only responsible for the physical well-being of the land, but for maintaining this delicate balance through their connection with the gods. The burial tombs of Egypt, therefore, were not just places where the dead were laid to rest. They were spiritual sanctuaries, designed to preserve the power and influence of the pharaohs in the afterlife. The treasures placed within these tombs were much more than material wealth. They were objects of profound spiritual significance. Statues, jewelry, amulets, and sacred texts were all placed with the belief that they would help the deceased pharaoh navigate the dangers of the afterlife and maintain their divine status. These objects were seen as imbued with magical properties, capable of protecting the pharaoh's spirit from malevolent forces and ensuring their continued reign over the realms of the dead. As such, these treasures became powerful symbols of Egypt's divine connection to the cosmos. The belief that the gods themselves were intimately involved in the lives of the pharaohs, and by extension, in the creation of these sacred artifacts, only added to their mystique. The idea that these objects were imbued with divine power only grew stronger as the centuries wore on, especially as Egypt fell into periods of conquest and foreign rule. The first major instances of theft occurred long before modern archaeology began. The looting of royal tombs during the late periods of Egypt's dynastic history was common, but many of the treasures taken in antiquity were lost to time, their whereabouts unknown. However, with the rise of European exploration and colonialism in the 19th century, Egypt's ancient relics once again became the subject of intense interest. Western explorers, archaeologists, and treasure hunters began excavating the tombs of Egypt's kings, and what followed was a massive and often illegal exportation of the country's most precious artifacts. These treasures, which had been buried for centuries, were removed from their sacred resting places and transported across the globe, where they were either placed in the hands of collectors or displayed in museums. At first glance, these objects might have appeared to be little more than historical curiosities, valuable primarily for their age and craftsmanship. But for many, the deeper significance of these artifacts lay in their potential to unlock the secrets of the ancient world. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, there was a prevailing belief that the ancient Egyptians possessed knowledge far beyond what was understood in the modern world. Their advanced understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, as well as their elaborate systems of religion and magic, suggested to many that they had access to hidden truths that could be accessed through the objects they left behind. These artifacts were not just things of beauty. They were keys to an ancient wisdom that had been lost to time. One of the most famous and most widely discussed artifacts is the tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered by British archaeologist Howard Carter in 1922. The tomb was filled with treasure, but it was the sheer quantity and variety of the items that captured the imagination of the world. In addition to gold masks, statues, and jewelry, the tomb contained ceremonial items and objects used for religious rituals. The treasure trove was, in essence, a window into the world of the ancient Egyptians, offering a glimpse into their beliefs, their culture, and their understanding of the divine. However, as with many other discoveries in Egypt, the treasure was not merely a collection of valuable objects. It was a spiritual artifact in itself, one that, for many, symbolized the return of the pharaoh's divine power to the earthly realm. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, along with the subsequent media frenzy that surrounded it, served to further entrench the belief that Egypt's lost treasures were more than just historical artifacts. They were conduits to the divine. The sudden deaths of several individuals connected to the tomb's opening only served to fuel this belief. Lord Carnarvon, the British aristocrat who funded the excavation, died shortly after the tomb was opened, leading to widespread speculation that he had been the victim of the so-called curse of the pharaohs. This curse, said to be the wrath of the gods on those who disturbed the tombs of Egypt's pharaohs, became a central theme in the ongoing story of Egypt's stolen artifacts. While some dismissed the idea of a curse as mere superstition, others believed it was a very real and powerful force, one that protected the treasures of the tombs from those who dared to desecrate them. As the story of Tutankhamun's tomb unfolded, more and more treasures were uncovered and removed from Egypt, adding fuel to the fire of mystery surrounding the ancient artifacts. Museums in Europe and America began to house large collections of Egyptian antiquities, many of which were taken under dubious circumstances. The question of whether these objects should be returned to Egypt has been a point of contention for decades. Egypt, as the land of origin, has long argued that these objects belong to the Egyptian people, who have a deep spiritual and cultural connection to the artifacts. The debate over the return of these stolen treasures continues to this day, with many in the Western world arguing that they belong in the institutions where they can be studied and appreciated by a global audience, while many Egyptians feel that the objects should be returned to their rightful home, where they could be preserved and respected in their original context. At the heart of this debate lies the question of ownership and the very essence of what these treasures represent. Are they simply material objects, valuable because of their age and craftsmanship, or are they symbols of something greater, something divine? The belief that these artifacts hold a power beyond their physical form is deeply ingrained in the mystique of ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians themselves saw their pharaohs as divine beings, and their treasures as manifestations of that divinity. For many, the removal of these sacred objects represents more than just an injustice. It is a violation of the spiritual connection between the living and the divine. As the world continues to wrestle with the fate of Egypt's stolen treasures, one thing is certain. These artifacts are not just relics of the past. They're living symbols of a lost world, one that still exerts a powerful influence on the modern world. Whether or not they are returned to Egypt, the treasures of ancient Egypt will continue to captivate the imaginations of those who seek to understand the mysteries of the past. The belief that these objects contain hidden knowledge, that they are more than just physical artifacts, is a testament to the enduring power of Egypt's ancient civilization. The mysteries of Egypt and the treasures that continue to be uncovered will continue to inspire, intrigue, and mystify as humanity seeks to unlock the divine secrets that have been hidden for millennia. The discovery of Egypt's ancient treasures and the subsequent theft and dispersion of these sacred artifacts across the world has ignited more than just curiosity. It has sparked a deep and enduring fascination with the mystical powers believed to be embedded within these objects. While the allure of Egypt's treasures was initially driven by their material value, gold, jewelry, and ancient relics, the deeper intrigue lies in the belief that these objects were not merely material items, but powerful symbols imbued with divine energies. Ancient Egypt, with its rich history, complex religion, and deep spiritual understanding of the cosmos, considered its treasures to be far more than relics of an ancient past. They were thought to hold access to spiritual and supernatural realms, serving as bridges between the physical and the divine. The removal of these treasures from their sacred tombs and temples, therefore, was not merely the loss of valuable items. It was the loss of a spiritual connection to the divine that stretched back to the dawn of civilization. From the outset, Egypt was a land shrouded in mystery and divinity. The pharaohs, seen as living gods on earth, ruled over both the land of the living and the land of the dead, ensuring that the harmony between both realms remained intact. Their tombs were elaborate and sacred, not merely intended to house their physical bodies, but also to ensure their eternal existence in the afterlife. Each tomb contained a wealth of treasures, not just to accompany the deceased on their journey, but also to safeguard them against the dangers of the underworld. These treasures were seen as sacred tools, created through powerful rituals and imbued with magical properties, designed to protect the pharaoh and ensure their continued power in the afterlife. The objects, whether statues, jewelry, amulets, or sacred scrolls, were believed to be more than mere possessions. They were part of a divine system of protection and spiritual power. The removal of these sacred artifacts from Egypt, particularly during the colonial period, became one of the most significant cultural and spiritual violations in history. The Western powers that sought to excavate and export Egypt's treasures did so with a mix of greed, scientific curiosity, and a profound belief in the transformative power of these objects. While the intent behind excavations might have seemed academic, an effort to study and preserve the past, the reality was more complex. The treasures taken from Egypt were not merely historical curiosities. They were artifacts of great spiritual significance, each one holding the potential to unlock ancient wisdom or harness divine power. As Western archaeologists and explorers began to unearth these treasures, the importance of their findings quickly became clear. The sheer magnitude and richness of the tombs that had been hidden for centuries underscored the sophistication of Egyptian civilization. But alongside the material wealth, there was also the realization that the objects within these tombs carried a deeper significance, one that went beyond their artistic beauty or craftsmanship. The objects were designed not only to symbolize divine power, but to serve as tools for maintaining that power. To the ancient Egyptians, their gods were ever present, and these treasures were seen as manifestations of that divine presence. The gold death mask of Tutankhamun, for example, was not just a work of art. It was a symbol of the pharaoh's divine status, a physical representation of his connection to the gods. To remove such an object was not merely to steal an item of material value. It was to sever the spiritual connection between the living and the divine, to rob the pharaoh of his divine essence. The belief that these treasures held spiritual significance is deeply tied to the role of the pharaoh in Egyptian society. As the intermediary between the gods and the people, the pharaoh's death and journey into the afterlife were central to the balance of the universe. The elaborate burial rituals and the treasures placed within the tombs were seen as necessary for the pharaoh's successful transition into the afterlife, where he would continue to rule as a divine entity. The objects in the tombs were considered essential for maintaining this divine power. To disturb these tombs and take these treasures was viewed as a violation not just of the dead, but of the spiritual order itself. The idea of curses placed upon tombs was an integral part of this spiritual understanding. The ancient Egyptians believed that the tombs of the pharaohs were protected by powerful forces, both human and divine. Curses were inscribed on the tombs, warning would-be tomb robbers of the dire consequences they would face should they desecrate the sacred space. These curses were not simply superstitions, but were believed to be backed by powerful magical forces, capable of bringing harm to anyone who disturbed the tombs. Over time, the idea of these curses became more than just a local belief. It became part of the wider cultural narrative surrounding the tombs and treasures of ancient Egypt, especially as the Western world began to unearth these treasures. The so-called curse of the pharaohs became a central part of the mythology surrounding the tomb of Tutankhamun. The sudden death of Lord Carnarvon, the financier of the tomb's excavation, and the subsequent misfortunes suffered by others connected to the discovery, fueled the belief that the curse was real. Though many dismissed these events as coincidence, others believed that the curse was a manifestation of the spiritual power that protected the treasures of Egypt. As Egypt's treasures were removed from their sacred tombs and dispersed around the world, the belief in their spiritual power continued to grow. These objects were no longer just relics of a long-gone civilization. They were believed to be active agents, imbued with the energy of the gods. The idea that these treasures could hold the key to unlocking ancient knowledge or even influencing the future became a central theme in the story of Egypt's lost artifacts. Many of those who sought these treasures were not simply interested in the material wealth they represented. They were also motivated by a desire to unlock the hidden wisdom of the ancient Egyptians. Some believed that the objects were capable of revealing long-forgotten secrets, including knowledge of advanced technologies or esoteric wisdom that could shape the course of history. This belief in the power of Egypt's treasures transcended the realm of archaeology and entered into the world of the occult. Many secret societies and esoteric groups began to take an interest in these artifacts, believing that they held the keys to spiritual enlightenment or even supernatural powers. The continued fascination with Egypt's stolen treasures is a testament to the enduring power of these objects. The belief that they contain hidden knowledge or access to divine forces is still prevalent today. The question of whether these artifacts are truly imbued with supernatural power or if the stories surrounding them are merely myth and legend is one that continues to be debated. However, what cannot be denied is the cultural and spiritual significance these objects continue to hold. The debate over the return of Egypt's treasures has evolved from a question of cultural ownership to a deeper exploration of the spiritual implications of their removal. Many Egyptians argue that these objects should be returned, not only because they are an integral part of their cultural heritage, but because they are sacred items deeply connected to the spiritual legacy of their civilization. The ongoing quest for Egypt's stolen artifacts is about more than just recovering lost treasures. It is about restoring a spiritual connection that has been severed. The objects, once removed from their sacred context, have taken on new meanings. They are no longer just historical artifacts. They are symbols of a lost connection to the divine. Their return would not simply be an act of cultural restitution. It would be an act of spiritual restoration. As Egypt reclaims its treasures, it would not only be reclaiming its heritage, but also reconnecting with the deep spiritual knowledge and power that these treasures represent. This idea of spiritual restoration is at the heart of the debate over the return of Egypt's lost artifacts. For many, the removal of these treasures was not simply a theft of material goods. It was an assault on the spiritual legacy of one of the world's oldest and most profound civilizations. The treasures of Egypt were never meant to be locked away in foreign museums. They were meant to be part of the ongoing relationship between the living and the divine. By returning these treasures to Egypt, we may be able to restore not just the physical objects, but also the spiritual connection that these artifacts were meant to preserve. Whether or not the treasures of Egypt possess supernatural power is something that may never be known for certain. However, what is undeniable is the lasting impact they have had on the world. The allure of Egypt's treasures, the belief in their mystical properties, and the search for hidden knowledge continue to captivate the imagination of people all over the world. As long as these treasures remain scattered across the globe, the mystery surrounding them will endure. But perhaps, in returning them to Egypt, we can unlock not only the secrets of the past, but also a deeper understanding of the spiritual forces that connect us all. The theft and subsequent dispersion of Egypt's ancient treasures have had lasting consequences, not just for the country of Egypt, but for the world's understanding of history, culture, and spirituality. Over the centuries, Egypt's artifacts have moved across borders, into the hands of private collectors, and into the halls of world-famous museums. These relics, once carefully protected in the tombs of pharaohs and sacred temples, have been removed from their original context and now exist as fragmented pieces scattered around the globe. However, it is not only their physical absence that creates a void, it is the loss of their connection to the sacred space that once housed them. For many, these artifacts were more than just historical relics. They were believed to be imbued with divine energy, to hold knowledge far beyond what was understood by contemporary cultures, and to serve as conduits to the mysteries of the cosmos. In ancient Egypt, objects were never just tools or decorations. They were integral parts of a vast spiritual system that permeated every aspect of life, death, and the afterlife. For the Egyptians, the line between the physical world and the spiritual world was thin, and the objects that accompanied their rulers into the tomb were not just items for their personal use, but spiritual tools designed to guide them through the afterlife. To disturb these objects, to remove them from their sacred tombs, was not simply an act of theft. It was an act that threatened the cosmic order, potentially disrupting the balance between life, death, and the gods. The ancient Egyptians themselves believed in the concept of spiritual contamination. When something sacred was defiled, it could bring about ruin. The loss of Egypt's treasures, therefore, is not only a matter of lost material wealth, but of a deeper violation of a sacred spiritual practice that spanned thousands of years. When Western explorers and archaeologists began to uncover Egypt's buried secrets, they were not just uncovering artifacts. They were removing vital pieces of a spiritual puzzle. These artifacts, from gold masks to intricate jewelry to painted walls of tombs, were designed with the intention of facilitating the deceased's transition into the afterlife. The role of the pharaoh in this spiritual process was paramount, as the king or queen was seen as a divine being responsible for maintaining harmony between the living and the dead. The objects placed in the tombs were not simply offerings. They were essential tools that enabled the pharaoh to navigate the perilous journey to the afterlife, ensuring that their divine power would endure beyond death. Many of these treasures contain magical inscriptions, symbols of protection, and prayers to the gods, which were meant to preserve the pharaoh's essence in the afterlife. The discovery and removal of these treasures by Western archaeologists often came with an air of scholarly excitement, but there was an inherent disconnect between the significance of these objects to the people of Egypt and the motives of those who sought to claim them. To many Western explorers, the treasures were merely historical artifacts to be studied and admired for their craftsmanship. But to the Egyptians, these were sacred objects, part of a larger metaphysical system. The Egyptians did not view their kings as merely powerful rulers. They viewed them as divine, chosen by the gods to maintain order and ensure prosperity for the people. The treasures within their tombs were not just to provide comfort in death. They were part of an ongoing divine mandate, enabling the pharaoh to continue to rule in the afterlife and beyond. The Western fascination with these artifacts and the desire to uncover them stemmed from a similar drive to gain access to hidden knowledge. The ancient Egyptians were renowned for their wisdom in subjects like astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and medicine, and many believe that these objects carried with them the knowledge and wisdom of the ancients. For explorers and scholars in the 19th and 20th centuries, there was the belief that by recovering these objects, they could unlock the secrets of the universe, secrets that have been kept hidden for millennia. Many of the archaeologists involved in these excavations were driven by the idea that they were bringing enlightenment to the world, that they were not simply looting, but rather unearthing knowledge that could benefit humanity. But as the treasures were removed and dispersed across the world, the ethical and spiritual implications of their removal became increasingly apparent. The issue of repatriation, the return of these treasures to their country of origin, has become one of the most controversial and emotional topics in modern archaeology. In the 21st century, Egypt has taken significant steps toward reclaiming its lost cultural heritage, pressing for the return of artifacts that were taken during the colonial era and the subsequent excavation periods. The argument for repatriation is not simply one of cultural ownership. It is a matter of spiritual integrity. The belief that these artifacts are connected to the land, to the culture, and to the divine essence of ancient Egypt is central to the call for their return. Many Egyptians feel that these treasures, which once had a deep connection to their ancestors, have been wrongfully taken and are now being held in foreign museums and private collections where they cannot serve their intended purpose. For them, these objects are not merely relics of history, but symbols of Egypt's spiritual and cultural identity. The repatriation of these objects is a complex and often contentious issue. On the one hand, many museums and institutions argue that they serve as global centers of learning and preservation, offering access to artifacts that might otherwise be inaccessible to the general public. These museums maintain that the objects are being kept in safe, controlled environments where they can be studied and admired by people from all over the world. They also argue that they play a vital role in the preservation of the objects, many of which would have deteriorated if left in their original locations. Furthermore, some claim that the objects have become part of the global cultural heritage and that their removal from Egypt was done with good intentions. On the other hand, many Egyptians and advocates for repatriation argue that these objects are part of the collective soul of the Egyptian people. The treasures of Egypt were never meant to be shared with the world in a disjointed, fragmented way. They were meant to remain intact, as part of a larger whole, preserved for future generations within Egypt's borders. In this view, the removal of these sacred objects has caused lasting harm, both to Egypt's cultural integrity and to the spiritual legacy of the civilization. The return of these treasures is seen as a necessary step in healing that wound and restoring Egypt's connection to its past. Beyond the debates over ownership and preservation, the question of the spiritual significance of these objects remains. Even as Egypt works to reclaim its stolen treasures, there is the ongoing mystery of their true power. Do these objects retain their sacred properties once they have been removed from their original tombs? Are they still conduits of divine energy, capable of influencing the physical world, Or have they become simply historical curiosities, objects stripped of their spiritual meaning? Many believe that the treasures of Egypt still carry an unseen force, one that connects the ancient past to the present. In this view, the artifacts are not simply relics of a bygone era, but living symbols of Egypt's divine heritage. The act of repatriating these treasures is not just about returning physical objects. It is about reconnecting with something far greater, the wisdom, power, and mystery of the ancient Egyptians. As Egypt continues to press for the return of its artifacts, there is a growing recognition of the need for a deeper understanding of these treasures. It is not enough to simply remove them from foreign museums and return them to Egypt. There's a need for a broader reimagining of how we understand and interact with these objects, and a recognition that the treasures of Egypt are not merely historical artifacts. They're sacred symbols, imbued with the energies of a lost civilization. The quest for Egypt's lost treasures is not just a journey through time. It is a journey into the depths of spiritual understanding, a search for hidden knowledge that stretches beyond the material world and into the realms of the divine.